Good afternoon. After many years and many victims, today there was justice. It was a long wait. It was a long trial. There was a lot of hardship and pain and suffering. But with the jury's verdict today, there is now justice. Defendant Shannon O'Connor was convicted of more than 60 crimes against more than a dozen child victims from Los Gatos. Every child who testified, the jury convicted the defendant of a charge involving that child. The charges included child endangerment, annoying and molesting a child, dissuading witnesses from testifying, and facilitating the forcible sexual assault from one child on to another child. We expect as parents that we protect children, protect our children, protect other people's children. This defendant took advantage of children, manipulated children, hurt children emotionally, mentally, physically, and did that for her own perverse reasons. And today there's justice for what she had done. It's important to recognize the victims who testified and their families, their parents who supported them during this very difficult ordeal. This case does not happen if the children do not come forward and stop what this defendant was doing. Without the children, the conduct continues. So our first thanks and appreciation is for the child victims in this case who came forward. Secondly, this is a case that few law enforcement agencies other than the District Attorney's Office Bureau of Investigations could investigate. There were hundreds of individuals interviewed. There are terabytes worth of information. Phone calls, jail calls, videos, social media. And investigator Christina Hanks from the District Attorney's Bureau of Investigation was the lead investigator and brought all of this evidence together. Without her, this case doesn't happen. And then, also standing with me, are three prosecutors on this case. This case began with Rebecca Wise, who's standing to my right, who did an enormous amount of work on this case. She's such a good prosecutor, I then promoted her, and we then handed this case to Joanna Lee and Morgan Willis. And they put together a powerful and compelling presentation to the jury in a trial that took months, 4 months to try this case, 63 counts, more than 20 witnesses testifying, just a tremendously complex case. And they put it together in a very strong and compelling way, which allowed the jury to come back with a verdict of more than 60 guilty counts, and the defendant looking at decades and decades in prison. Because of Joanna's efforts and Morgan's efforts, there's justice and there's accountability. With that, I'm happy to take a few questions.
Can you tell us how many years she could be facing at this point, given the guilty verdicts today?
So there's a sentencing hearing that's going to happen later this afternoon, which may affect a little bit on the margins, the number of years, but it's safe to say that we're talking about more than 30 years in prison, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Was all the victims underage?
The victims at the time that these crimes were committed were minors. And I think one thing, honestly, that Joanna and Morgan did that I thought was extremely compelling is they had photographs of the victims at the time that this defendant committed her crimes against them, and you could see they were children. And then she had a photo next to that of them as what they look like today, 6 years later. And so I think that really helps to capture the long-term effects of what the defendant did to the victims in this case.
Can you clarify what's happening when the jury comes back after lunch?
Yes. So actually what's going to happen after lunch is the defendant is going to decide whether to waive jury and have the judge decide the aggravating factors. So I think that's going to happen first. If the defendant waives a jury trial on the aggravating factors, then there'll be a court trial on the aggravating factors. And the aggravating factors, if the judge or jury finds them to be true, would add some additional amount of time. But I can say that we're looking at 30 years or more in terms of just the charges that she's been convicted of now.
Aggravated would be what?
One second.
Of a victim while intoxicated, the guilty charge. Again, whether is she guilty of that act or more of a facilitating, just so we can make sure we're clear about that.
Yeah, so she was found guilty of 2 counts of forcible. She was found guilty of 2 counts of digital penetration of an individual that was too intoxicated to consent. And she was found guilty as an aider and abettor, as a facilitator of those crimes. She encouraged, facilitated, and aided and abetted one child in sexually assaulting another child, and did that on 2 separate occasions with 2 separate victims.
Are those accounts that held the most weight in terms of adding to the sentencing or the time, potentially time bars?
Those are the most serious counts. Those counts carry 3, 6, or 8 years in prison. Yeah.
Ask you about the aggravators that.
Oh. So there'll be a jury trial or a court trial, and the aggravating factors that will be argued about are whether the defendant violated a position of trust, took advantage of vulnerable victims, or used very sophisticated measures and manipulation to commit these crimes. Those are some of the aggravating factors that the prosecution and defense will be arguing about in front of either a jury or a judge.
And your position on that is what?
Our position is that those aggravating factors are present, and that's what we'll be arguing to a judge or a jury. We think that those factors are things that the defendant did, and they would increase the potential sentence.
I know we're talking about a criminal individual here at this point, but are there any lessons for parents out of this? You know, either hosting parties or with kids who might be going to parties?
Look, I have 2 daughters that are adults now. It's not easy to be a parent. But I think that every parent has a strong instinct to protect their children and to protect other children. And what is so disturbing and wrong about this case is this defendant used children, took advantage of them, manipulated them for her own perverse sexual interests. And I would just tell parents to hug their children.